Okay, domain 7, cryptography and private key algorithms. In this area, we're going to cover historical uses of cryptography, the foundational pieces of cryptography, of course, symmetric and asymmetric algorithms, public key infrastructure, email client encryption procedures, protocols that use cryptography, and of course, attacks on cryptography. Does everybody know the difference between symmetric and asymmetric cryptography? With symmetric, you're going to have the same key on both sides. And basically, it's a lot faster than asymmetric. And with asymmetric, you're going to have your public-private key pairs. So it's going to be a lot slower, but usually a lot more secure. Okay, in the past, crypto was basically mainly used for providing confidentiality. It protected sensitive information, mainly during transmission. Today, basically, it's used for confidentiality, but also used for data integrity, source authentication, and non-repudiation. Non-repudiation is something you basically just need to memorize the definition for. It is something that's really pushed throughout the community. This is basically where the sender cannot deny sending the message at a later date. And the main reason that's the case is because they have their private key, they sign it, do a digital signature on that, and only that digital signature can create that valid hash. However, if somebody steals the person's private key, then they can create the hash the same, except that's one of the things when it's being compromised. You can go through and say that yes, it was signed with that digital signature, but the CA or certificate authority or the other server will actually see what system actually did the communications with it. So basically it makes it to where this can be faked, but it makes one bigger hurdle to go through. All comes down to the security of the key storage. Okay, cryptographic definitions. Cryptography is the science of hiding the meaning of a communication. Cipher is something that transforms characters or bits into unreadable formats. Algorithmic or cryptographic algorithm. Basically, this is a procedure that turns readable data into unreadable format. Cryptanalysis is the science of studying and breaking encryption mechanisms. So it's different than your basic cryptography. Cryptology is the study of cryptography and cryptanalysis. And basically key clustering is when two keys generate the same ciphertext from the same plain text. And then you have your crypto system. This encompasses all the necessary components for an encryption and decryption, such as software, protocols, algorithms, keys, both public and private as well. And PGP is an example of a crypto system. Bless you. Okay, these right here, another thing is basically just need to memorize. Plain text is going to be the human readable format. Then ciphertext goes through a cipher, and then becomes an unhuman readable format. So technically it is readable, but ciphertext can also be in other formats such as hashing. Hashing is a one-way encryption string. So the primary difference to memorize between encryption and hashing is that encryption is encrypted and it can be decrypted. With hashing, it is encrypted and there is no way back. A lot of times you'll have it to where there's, for example, 32 characters for MD5 hash. Doesn't matter how much data you put into it, it's always going to come out with your 32 character string. So whenever they go through the same hash algorithm, that 32 character string should match. So if you have, let's say, a small letter or small email that only has 50 characters, if you change one character out of the 50, it is more than likely going to change that 50 character or that 32 character string. But if you have an entire hard drive that has, let's say, a full terabyte worth of data, if you change some data on that hard drive, you're a lot more likely to be able to come out with the same hash just because there's more mathematical possibilities of the changes. There are a few projects out there that are trying to figure out where you can change where the breaking point is on the size of the hard drives and the amount of data that you can change to come out with the same hash, which basically comes back to the statistical analysis attacks or the birthday attacks. And if anybody's able to, and realistically do that, what's going to end up happening is a lot of the forensics is going to go down the tube as far as, because that's how a lot of people are determining the hash value. So instead of using the MD5 hash, you may have to use a SHA-1 and an MD5 combo. because chances are the two different algorithms and two different key lengths, one being 32 and 48, is going to be that if they do not match, the MD5 it could change, and the MD5 matches, but the SHA-1's not going to match with that same data string. So it's going to make it just a lot harder to break. Okay, work factor is the time, effort, and resources necessary to break the crypto system. Effort and time needed to overcome the protective measure. And the goal of the encryption is to make the work factor too high for a compromise to be attempted or accomplished in a specific period of time. For example, if you have data that you need to secure for, say, 30 days at a time, your crypto system or the work factor for the crypto system you're using would be acceptable to have it to where it would take, say, 10 years for them to crack it, because you know that they're not going to be able to break it within the 30-day time frame. However, again, with the specific technologies that keep coming out today, especially the different things that are going to be used, like the video card processors for cracking passwords or cracking encryption as well, basically makes it to where if you're banking on only a 10-year work factor, depending on the person that's attacking you, they may be able to break it in mere minutes as opposed to your 30-day strings. So basically, but yeah, the work factor is very important to know. Is if you have a specific content of data that you want to secure for a 5-year period of time, such as credit card number or whatnot, with the CVE number and all the other information, you may have it to where you want the work factor to be hundreds of thousands of years in theory, which again, it's probably not going to be in the next 5 or 10 years. But the theory is they won't be able to break it by the time the data is useless. Okay, symmetric cryptography. Use of secret keys. You have two instances of the same key. And the issue is let's say you have 20 people in the room, they're using symmetric cryptography, they all have the same key. So if you compromise any one of those 20 instances of the key, the entire crypto system's no longer valid, because the compromise is now leaking the data. Okay, use of symmetric cryptography. Okay, hieroglyphs, basically first recorded in 2000 BC. First known use of cryptography. And the main reason it was first known use of cryptography is because only certain people were basically taught the language. Same type of thing with the gold wind talkers in World War II. So they had it to where it was the Navajo language. Not very many people spoke it. So when it came down to it, is that even though it wasn't technically true cryptography, it was in the aspect that they were able to speak two languages and the other side was not able to speak that secondary language. So that was a shared key cryptography. The SkyTel cipher. Basically this type of paper or leather that was wrapped around a rod, and you had to have the specific diameter of the rod to be able to encrypt or decrypt the message. The message was written on a paper and carried to destination by the messenger. The sender and the destination had the same rod diameter, so that each would read the message, and was used around 400 BC. The problem is, again, that if you have enough time, you can easily say, okay, it doesn't fit on this rod, doesn't fit on this rod. Let's actually get a big piece of paper and then slowly make it bigger until it actually makes words. So again, not the best, but better than nothing. The Caesar cipher. And all of these are basically historical representations of encryptions that you will need to know for the test for the trivia portion, or the Jeopardy. So Caesar cipher. Basically, this is one character is replaced by a character that is 3 places up the alphabet. And basically does a word wrap. And this is something, again, you just need to memorize, is Caesar cipher is traditionally 3 places up. Also referred to as a shift cipher. If one alphabet is used, a monoalphabetical substitution algorithm, and also more than one alphabet is used, a polyalphabetic substitution algorithm. Then you have your symmetric cipher, so the sender and receiver must use the same key. The key equals 3 spaces, so otherwise known as bit shifting as well. In today's terms, that's not really encryption anymore, that's more of an encoding, because if everybody knows the key, then it's one of those things to where the algorithm doesn't change, because this part right here is always going to be 3. So that's an encoding stream. But standard alphabet and then cryptographic alphabet. D through C as opposed to A through Z. Historical use of symmetric cryptography. You have the Veneer cipher. Basically, this is a polyalphabetic substitution cipher proposed by this gentleman from the court of Henry III of France in the 16th century. Basically an extension of the Caesar cipher. As you can see, it's a little bit more complex because they're basically using two different keys. So, historical use of symmetric cryptography. You have the Enigma machine. How many people remember that? Good old Enigma machine, which was the German crypto device. It had it to where each typewriter had its own special head.
The NSA Cryptography Museum, they have one you can play with, which
yes.
not very anymore, because everybody's...
Yeah, they do, and that's another thing that every once in a while, I know 2 years ago with DEF CON, they had in the, actually this was in the lockpicking village, they actually had somebody with a homemade Enigma machine. And they basically, it was one of the things to where if you were able to break the code, then you could get $500 or something like that. So they didn't have very many people try, and nobody was able to break it, which it's very difficult to break, and it took us a long time to get it. So basically we had to find one of those crypto devices and then reverse engineer it. Okay, it's a rotor cipher machine that uses a polyalphabetic substitution. It was employed in World War II and had a huge effect in the war. It's a symmetric, so sender and receiver must have the same key. So basically they have to have the same cylinder head. And then also sender entered a character and the rotors moved just like a typewriter or whatnot. And it came down to you had to key each individual rotor, each individual had the same. Okay, one thing that a lot of crypto analysts would actually look for is, especially back in World War II, a lot of entities or whatnot, say if you read an email or read a letter, it would say, "Dear Sir," which would be the first few characters, and then a lot of times they'll start off with a formal greeting. And then what you can do is, because if you know the text that's going into the algorithm, you can basically take that text and look at from the plain text, look at the ciphertext and see how it changes or what happens during it. For example, if you have a block cipher, a lot of times it may say it takes the first 64 characters and encrypts it. So on each letter, you'll have the first 64 characters be the same every single time. So once you finally decrypt it, a lot of times you can say, okay, these 64 characters make this string. Now we can try to figure out what math they're using behind the algorithm and then start to decrypt it. But that's one way that they're able to decrypt a lot of the messages, is basically because people are too standardized in some forms as saying like "Dear Sir" or whatnot. Unfortunately nowadays, a lot of times when people are writing email, it's never consistent. It could have a name, it could have nothing at the top, or just starts in with the email. So it makes it a lot more difficult for cryptoanalysis. With one-time pads, this is basically using the Vernheim cipher. One-time pad devised by Gilbert Vernheim in 1917. Basically still used today for backup, ways to encrypt messages if the regular means is unavailable. Then also key equals one-time pad. Sender uses to encrypt the message, receiver uses to decrypt the message. And it's just one go. Okay, one-time pad characteristics. Deemed unbreakable if the perfect encryption scheme, if the pad is made up of truly random values. The pad is used only one time. Pad is securely distributed to the destination. And pad is secured at the sender and receiver sites. And pad is at least as long as the message. One thing that you will see when, for example, encrypting email, a lot of people do your good old digital signatures, which adds a small block at the end of the email message. But if you're doing any sort of encryption, a lot of times what you'll see is a large portion of the email message, potentially even double the email message, is going to be stored on the server of the system. So if you have PSTs and you only have, let's say, 5 gigs or even 1 gig space value on your PST or in your store, or 50 megs on your store, if somebody's sending you a 30 meg email and then they're trying to encrypt it, there's a very good possibility you may not be able to receive it on your server. Okay, this is something you basically just have to memorize. How many people have dealt with OR, XOR, basically an exclusive OR? This is something that, again, for the CISSP, you may come across it, and if you do, you just need to memorize what an exclusive OR means. It means it could either A, for example, be 0 or 1, but it cannot be 0 and 0 or 1 and 1. It has to be one or the other. So for example, if both bits are the same, such as 0 XOR 0 equals 0, and 1 XOR 1 equals 0. If bits are different, it equals 1. So 1 XOR 0 equals 1, and 0 XOR 1 equals 1. So with that being said, if you have the basic OR statement, you can have, what would it be, like a 1 or 0, and basically that would be still a positive, but with the XOR, it cannot be the same. Okay, key algorithm relationships. Basically, a long string of random values. A lot of the algorithms, they'll basically have it, the differences between an open algorithm and then a proprietary or closed algorithm. The open algorithm scheme is that everybody has access to the algorithm, so the encryption is not based on the security or the secrecy of the algorithm. It's based on the strength of the key. Then there's the other fight as far as being closed development, so you're dealing with the secrecy of the algorithm, and that's where your protection scheme is coming from. The big argument is that some people say it's more secure to have a closed environment or closed algorithm because nobody knows what the algorithm is, therefore it's going to be harder to attack. And that is true to a certain extent. Once the people find out, or once the enemy finds out what the algorithm is, it's usually a lot easier to break because it hasn't been vetted by the rest of the world. So if you have an open algorithm scheme, usually everybody in the world is trying to attack it, and once something bad happens to the algorithm, then a white paper is given out so you know that it's been compromised. Then you can go to the next generation of it. Okay, algorithm, group of mathematical equations that can be used for the encryption and decryption process. And used together, key values are used by the algorithms to indicate the equations to use, in what order and with what values. Okay, brute force. Basic password cracking, brute force is going to try all possible attempts. Granted, all possible attempts basically means the possibilities that you give it. For example, you can do a brute force on just numerics, 0 through 9, or you can do 0 through 9, A through Z, basically your alphanumerics, spaces, special characters on an English character set. So you'll have, let's say, 40, 45 different characters to attack from. But again, when it says all possible, it means all possible from the variables that you give it. Okay, basically it takes the ciphertext, applies key, and then sees if there's understandable plain text derived. And then within the brute force, the program is to be written. If the result is understandable or gibberish, basically, a lot of times you'll have it, it's where it goes to the algorithm, it dumps something, it looks for specific keywords, such as the, any sort of other ones like and, or anything like that. If it does see that, then it sees it as being a potential possibility. And also, how many possible values or keys would have to be tried. On a 40-bit key, there's about 1 trillion possible key values. On a 56-bit key, there's about 72 quadrillion possible values. And then so far, 256, again, it's going to be way higher. And then 1024, even more. And that's the interesting probability issues as far as, like with WEP. WEP, a lot of people don't know that the key value is actually only, was it 40 and then 104. Even though they tout that it's going to be your 56 or 64-bit key and then your 128-bit key. It leaves a lot of that space empty. So you're actually not attacking the full key length because a lot of it's not used for the actual key itself. Okay, frequency analysis. Frequency analysis is basically where patterns in ciphertext are determined or identified and matched back to the plain text. Again, does everybody understand the difference between plain text and ciphertext? Plain text being humanly readable, ciphertext being what goes to the algorithm and to be non-humanly readable. Okay, in English, most used letters E, and most used word is the. When it comes down to it, is they're trying to look for like the 3-character words or whatnot within the algorithm or within the plain text. This allows attackers to reverse engineer encryption process. One thing that you'll also see with this statistical frequency analysis, how many people here have heard of acoustic keyboard monitoring? There's actually a white paper that was written by both a Chinese researcher and an Australian researcher back in, was it February 2005, to where if you have a microphone in a specific area, it's basically a cryptographic attack type scenario, but what they have it is to where if you're listening, specific people type specific words so many times or out of so many characters that they are going to type in a specific time period. So if you're listening for 15 minutes, you'll be able to tell within, let's say, like an 85 or 95% reliability what words they're probably typing. If you listen for longer periods of time, of course, the accuracy is going to increase from there. And that's another reason why a lot of areas, because the keyboards are going to make different sounds for different keys. The pressure that you're pushing on the key, the angle that you're pushing the key, each key, one may have the spring is starting to break or whatnot, so each key is going to have its own unique tone or sound. So that's why a lot of people are trying to make it to where your regular keyboards are also away from your phones a certain distance, or make it to where no phones are going to be allowed within a specific area within a data center. But all going back to frequency analysis and crypto, that same type of attack is trying to also being used for keylogging or sniffing. And that, of course, is not going to be a hardware attack. It's not going to be a software keylogger as well. That's going to be a completely different space and probably not going to be on the test. Oh, at least it shouldn't be on the test, even though it's been around for a couple of years. Okay, characteristics of strong algorithms. Strong algorithms are going to contain confusion, which is complexity of the process to increase the work factor of reverse engineering. The interceptor should not be able to predict the change in one character in a plain text to resulting in the ciphertext. For example, in the old ones, if you changed, like the Caesar cipher, you changed one character, only one character in the Caesar cipher would change. So then basically you just focus on that until you finally get the result that you're looking for. Diffusion. Basically, a component going through the encryption process should have many things to take place throughout the entire algorithm. So if anything's different within that whole process, it's going to change the ciphertext. Changes in the plain text should affect many parts of the ciphertext. Like MD5, for example. If you go through an MD5 hash set, you change one character within the hash, and it's going to change the whole entire cipher, or ciphertext. So when it comes down to it, if you go from say, an uppercase T to a lowercase t, it's going to change everything. Okay, this guy is principal. Basically, Mr. Kirchhoff published a paper in 1883 stating that only one secrecy involved in the cryptographic system should be the key. Basically, he claimed that the algorithm should also be publicly known. And again, the big fight with the algorithm being publicly known is that then everybody's going to be able to hammer at it, and then it's going to be a lot more secure in the long run. Good old WEP had that issue, is where they didn't publish it as much, and then once there was a break in the algorithm, then basically just went downhill from there. Okay, should not be based on security or on the assumptions that other will not figure out how the protection mechanism works. Again, because if you're pushing on the secrecy, there's always the possibility of even dumpster diving coming out with the algorithm. Because somebody types something down, writes something down, or data is dumped in over the network that you shouldn't be able to be seen, and it's just not secure anymore. And also the debate in the cryptography field is many non-government cryptographers think that all algorithms should be public, and then government does not agree with this and does not release some of the algorithms. When it comes down to it is that, again, there is a specific thing to be said for the secrecy part, but if that's the whole thing that you're basing everything off of, then there could be a huge hole, and it's just harder to find. Okay, types of ciphers used today. There's a substitution method. There's the transposition method, symmetric ciphers such as block and stream ciphers, and also asymmetric ciphers. Okay, substitution. Substitution is basically substituting one bit for another bit. Destination has already the correct key to indicate how to substitute the original back to what it is, basically cipher back to the plain text. The transposition is bits are moved into new places in a bit stream. Bits are scrambled, no new bits are introduced. And then also destination has to have a correct key to indicate how to unscramble the bits. So if it comes down to it, the destination side always has to have the right key to be able to decode everything. Okay, block cipher. This is going to be a symmetric cipher. This message is divided into blocks and put through mathematical functions. Each block is encrypted separately, and then the whole message is not encrypted as one entity, and then best used in software implementations. And this is X boxes used in block ciphers, substitution boxes. Blocks of data are then encrypted through many rounds of mathematical routines. Again, whenever you do any sort of encryption, especially some of the more powerful ones, it is going to take a lot of processing power. So that's another reason why a lot of people do not like to encrypt large databases. For example, good old Oracle. If they're doing massive transactions through an Oracle database, they may be going and only going through specific rows or records and encrypting only that data as opposed to the entire database and then basically an entire record set. But again, a lot of times you'll go through multiple rounds. There's the stream cipher. Basically encrypts individual bits in a message, no blocks of data. One bit of the stream key is XORed in the bit from the message, similar to a one-time pad. Then the stream algorithms have key stream generators. Then more complex when it comes to proper implementation compared to block ciphers. Basically, this is best used in hardware implementations rather than the block cipher in software implementations. Okay, the encryption process. Basically, you have your clear text or plain text message. Each character within the message gets put into the algorithm. The values are determined by the key, which is in this aspect. So basically, it gets hashed once, then goes to the algorithm, and then the ciphertext is going to be at the bottom. So again, you have your plain text. It goes through the algorithm with your key seed, and then comes out with basically the non-human readable code. Okay, message authentication code. You have your message, your secret key, go through the hash algorithm, and then come out with your ciphertext. To unencrypt it, what ends up happening is then it goes to the person's system. They have their secret key. They either unencrypt it or decrypt it, and then it comes back down to the plain text. What's really interesting about this scenario as far as the emails go, the majority of them are going to be using the PKI or public key infrastructure or X509 certificates. So what ends up happening is there's the public and private key. So again, when you're encrypting, you are encrypting with their public key and they decrypt with their private key. So it's both the target's keys. When you do encrypt an email, you don't have to sign it. It's just good practice to sign it and encrypt it. But again, if you're going to sign it, then it's going to be with both your keys. You sign it with your private, they verify it with your public key. Okay, digital signatures. Basically what these do is they provide authenticity and non-repudiation. After a message is put through a hashing algorithm, an MD value is encrypted with the sender's private key. What usually happens is, let's say if somebody does a digital signature, puts it on an email, you're going to have the entire email in plain text. And then at the bottom of the email, you're going to have this hash, which is going to be your digital signature. So if that has been altered, or the email has been altered in transit, you can still read it. But what should happen is whenever you get their public key, you validate it, rehash it, and if the digital signatures do not match, it should give you some sort of error saying that the message has been tampered with or potentially altered during transit. But the issue is you can still read the message. So that's one thing other with encryption. If it changes during transit, you may not be able to open up the item because the keys just don't match. But with digital signatures, it's just something added to the bottom of the message. Okay, the receiver validates the digital signature by decrypting it with the sender's public key. And then it provides data integrity, authenticity, and non-repudiation. And why does it offer non-repudiation?
Once you send it, you can't say it didn't come from you.
Yeah, because you have to have your private key. And that's the one thing, if you have some sort of a symmetric key through email, then you can't prove non-repudiation because everybody's going to have the same key. But with the PKI or the asymmetric key cryptography, you can because only you are supposed to have that key. And that's the nice thing about some of the PKI initiatives that are going out there that actually have the physical tokens rather than soft tokens, because the only way that you can send an encrypted email is with a smart card. You put the smart card in your system, that is your key. So it makes it.
One more thing is if you have, well, for those who work with cache, if you encrypt the system, if it's configured properly,
Yeah.
it is, it won't let you encrypt because it will automatically tell you whether the person that you're sending to, the certificates are up to, they're not up to date, it's not going to let you encrypt. So.
Yeah. And that's one of the things I've seen as far as a failure of some PKI implementations or CAs is they allow people to cache locally. So it doesn't actually go to the server and then do the encryption. What it does is say, well, I have the certificate here. They go to look for the revocation list maybe, if that doesn't work or whatnot. If it's not a bad one, then it sends anyway. But what ends up happening with that is a break in the chain, and so it also does not allow for non-repudiation on the receiving side. Because if you have it to where it forces them to communicate with the server each time, then it comes down to, yes, I did encrypt it, they encrypted it, and so forth. But definitely the physical ones are making the PKI initiative a lot better. Because if you are trying to use software tokens, then if somebody gets on your system, steals your soft token, then you can pretend to be that individual and fraudulently send out email.
You say soft token is simply a password you put in to initiate the PKI.
Right. Yeah, some...
Well, mine, I mean, it just asks for, it says you got an email, the entrust box comes up.
Yeah.
And you simply enter in your password, and that means soft token essentially.
Yeah, something you might have on, like on your C drive or whatnot, or in a specific folder, and then it pops up, and most of them are password encrypted. But if the attacker has a keylogger, if they already have physical access to your system, and if they took the certificate, they'd probably already have thought of a way to get to password. Just more than likely.
People that have laptops that have PKI on them, if somebody gets a hold of the laptop and they simply go to the folder that contains all that, you're saying they've got the keys?
Well, they physically have the key, yes. When it comes, but they may not have the password if they stole the laptop.
Right.
They've also got to be able to get into the laptop.
Yeah.
So like ours are encrypted.
Yeah, if you have the encryption on data at rest, that's why basically that layered security thing, then it makes it a lot more difficult. However, I know some organizations that, of course, they do their encryption on data at rest, but they may not store the crypto key in a central location. So what ends up happening is when it comes in for forensics, there's no way to unlock their own system, which is not a good thing. If you're in a business environment, you want to be able to have some sort of key storage, or at least some sort of ways to break into your own content. Because then what it comes down to is that then you have to send it to the manufacturer of the software or the hardware device, and then they have their skeleton key, and then they'll break into it for you, but it's a huge fee. But, yeah. How many people here have dealt with data recovery before? I know a lot of manufacturers are trying to get into the data recovery space, which is interesting. But what ends up happening is, like with the encryption type scenario, is that if you lock yourself out, some of them actually do have backdoors to get into the system. And they won't actually give you the backdoor, even if you are of an interesting organization. What they'll end up having to do is you'll have to send it to them, and then they break into it for you. They're also doing that with like physical hard drives. They're trying to make it to where individuals can't do any sort of data recovery by like putting platter blockers in the drives, so you can't actually pull the platters out without specialized tools made specifically from the manufacturer that makes the drive. So it's definitely becoming an interesting world out there. But yeah, as far as the encryption, it all comes down to the key storage. So however you're protecting the key, and one of the best ways to protect the key is to have like a password or passphrase. So if somebody steals the laptop, they can't use your key unless they know that. But if it's an attacker, they breaks into your system, and then what ends up happening is they put some sort of keylogger in your system, they put like netcat or whatnot, and then try to start transferring files off. They specifically find the key because they know your system, they've exploited it. That's the dangerous ones, or the people that are in the office that wants to target somebody else, or if, for example, if somebody's doing embezzlement and they have advanced knowledge in computers, which could happen, and they want to frame somebody in the organization, that's what they do, is they probably put some sort of keylogger, get the username and password, and then take the certificate and then log in as that individual, send out some emails tying it to that person's account, and then moving on that way. So there's definitely some issues there, but it's not nearly as bad as the symmetric, which is everybody has the same key. So the non-repudiation isn't perfect, but it all comes down to the security policies you have in place and what you do to secure the key. For example, like the physical ones, people that do deal with CAC, since it's a physical token, if you lose it, you're supposed to immediately call security or the individuals that actually gave you the PKI certificate, and then tell them that it's a bad certificate. And then they put it on what's called a revocation list. So anybody that uses it, they go to the server. It's not only going to tell the PKI people where it's going to be at, but it's also going to tell everybody else that's trying to communicate with that certificate that it's failed as well. But it's just harder to do if it's a file on a system because you don't know people have actually stolen it. Okay, digital signatures and MAC comparison. Comes down to it, there's a symmetric cryptography. There's the MAC equals hash plus symmetric key. And then there's asymmetric cryptography, which is digital signature equals hash plus asymmetric key. But when it's doing the digital signature, it's going to be the private key versus the shared secret key in symmetric. And so the more secure one, especially if you're going to multiple systems, is of course going to be the asymmetric. Question? Okay. Okay, U.S. government standard. There's the digital signature standard, or DSS. Secure hashing algorithm SHA must be used for a message digest creation. There's also DSS, RSA, and ECDSA, asymmetric algorithms, can be used for digital signature creation. ECDSA is elliptical curve cryptography, and that's the digital signature algorithm for the ECC portion. So, but definitely know that ECC is elliptical curve cryptography, and the ECDSA is the DSA variant of the ECC algorithm. Strength of hashing. Hashing should be computed over the entire message. Messages cannot be disclosed by the MD value. And different messages should generate different MD values or MD items. The collision-free basically means that it's not going to be susceptible to birthday attack or frequency analysis. So what ends up happening is that, let's say if you have 1 million possibilities, out of those 1 million possibilities of being put into the algorithm, not one single possibility should come out with the same, basically, ciphertext. So it doesn't matter how you change the plain text, you should never have the same ciphertext more than once. And in the perfect world, you'll have a hashing algorithm where that's possible, where it's always going to be different. The problem is, for example, like MD3, MD4, MD2, MD5, all of those are susceptible to birthday attacks or collisions. Just the higher the number, the less the frequency. So the MD5 is a lot more secure or a lot less frequent for collisions than MD2 is. Same thing with SHA-1. That is also susceptible to a birthday attack or collision attacks. But again, because it's a longer algorithm, the results are longer, it's a lot less susceptible than an MD. A lot of people are going, instead of using the SHA-1, they're going up to SHA-384 or SHA-512. So with that being said, I believe the standard they're trying to push is at least 256. But you also want to do resistant to birthday attacks, which is going to be the frequency analysis. Okay, birthday attacks, mathematical parity. Basically, how many people have to be in the same room where you have a 50% chance where somebody has the same birthday as you. And that's basically where you're picking an individual person, which is going to be yourself. And it says about 253 people. And then somebody's probably going to have the birthday as you. And then that basically means that just 50-50. With this right here, if you have 23 people, 2 random people are probably going to have the same birthday. But it's not going to be, I choose this person and this person. It's just going to be random. With hashing issue, it's easier to find 2 messages that have the same message digest value than looking for one particular message digest value and trying to go through that. Hashing value equals n. Brute forcing finds one specific hashing value, which is 2n. Brute force to find any 2 matching values, which is 2, n divided by 2. The crux is a hashing algorithm that generates a larger message digest is less vulnerable to birthday attack than an algorithm with a smaller message digest or ciphertext. So it comes down to, like I mentioned before, like the MD5 hash, it's only going to be 32 characters versus SHA, which is going to be 48, which is going to be a lot less susceptible to the birthday attack or collision than its smaller cousin.